Today on the Sound Health Podcast.
And so then my dad happened to find an old piano somebody's, was thrown away. And so we put it in the garage. And so I played a piano in the garage growing up with a bunch of broken keys. And in the wintertime, it was kind of not the easiest thing to do. You'd freeze if you wanted to go out and play, which I would do all the time to the chagrin of my brothers and sisters because it was loud. And then there would be like soot from the car and everything like on the key.
Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to take advantage of a free resource I made for you. It's called the Sound Health Newsletter. In it, I share the latest research in music and health. Plus, you'll learn music and wellness exercises that you can use every day to feel your best. Just come visit me at donovanhealth.com to get started today. That's donovanhealth.com. Hey there, this is Jim Donovan. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. We have a really fun show for you today with a dear friend of mine, Mr. Randy Baumann. Randy is a professional musician and comedian. He's also the host of the DVE Morning Show, which broadcasts to over 275 million people every month on 102.5 WDVE in Pittsburgh. Randy is a big believer in the healing power of music and bringing people together to support charitable causes. Hey, welcome to the show, Randy. So glad to have you here, man. How have you been?
Dude, I'm doing okay. As good as can be expected. You and I spoke before you started recording this, and I'm glad to know that you're hanging in there too. So many creative people I know are struggling with how to stay motivated during a time in which it feels like there's a big cloud hanging over you.
Yeah, what are you hearing? What are these guys saying?
Well, mostly what I hear is that people who thought that they were going to write the great American novel, during this time off have found themselves unable to get creatively inspired, which just makes sense to me. It's tough when you're trying to deal with something that is this heavy and unknown. And as you'd said before, there's no playbook for this.
Right.
So all of that uncertainty does not exactly give you the best gasoline to make the creativity car go.
Yeah, it's weird because at least in my own process, I got to be in some sort of deeper relaxation to get into a flow. And
right.
I feel like I've been on fight or flight mode for a month and a half. Just making sure that everything's all right. My God, is there enough toilet paper? Maybe we should buy a bidet. I don't know. And
exactly. You definitely should buy a bidet.
I was looking at bidets the other day.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can get buy-in, but I guess if there's no toilet paper, I'll get buy-in quicker.
Yeah, I don't know. I think eventually there'll stop being a run on the toilet paper. I think it's slowed down a little bit right now. But, it's tough when you're a musician or an artist of any caliber that relies on your brain to be somewhat at rest, to be able to use the side of your brain that's going to inspire you to do your art. And it's clouded with actual existential threat. It's true.
And then there's that whole part about, you and I think we have a similarity in that we're always on, we're always doing stuff, running here and there. And when I'm not doing that, when I'm not in my my zone where I'm teaching or I'm playing a show, I've got a family life, but I start to get a little weirded out that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I feel I'm not doing my work.
Right. Yeah, but everything I've read about this basically tells you that you have to try to allay the guilt that you'll lay on yourself for not being productive enough, because of the uncertainty of this, and you kind of have to listen to your body and everything. And, your family is there, and hopefully that has served to be a great deal of comfort during this time. And I wouldn't beat yourself up about not being able to run anywhere right now, and maybe give your brain the opportunity to see what it's like to be at rest for a little while. Though I know you, and I know it's not at rest.
It is, and then it's not. I've been taking extra care of myself, like I'm doing the nap thing and the walks and the meditation, like all the stuff that I always want to make sure that I do. I have to do a little bit extra of it just to keep steady. And I know the days that I don't do that stuff, my mood goes down, anxiety goes up. And it's just an interesting thing. It's like we were talking about. There's no guidebook for this except for the body. Like the body tells us really what needs to happen.
Right.
And you mentioned something before we were recording. You said that you had a weekend where you just didn't do anything.
Well, yeah, I have a list of things that I want to try to achieve. And I felt that the first thing on that list was making the list.
Yeah, right. Number one, sit down,
I made
make
the
list.
That was the first weekend. I felt pretty good about that.
That's good,
Look at me. I got a list. And then, I started to tackle a little bit of it, in the first couple of weeks. And I was like, this is going to be a breeze, man. I am going to be, because I have the good fortune of being able to work from home right now. So that keeps me occupied most of the day, sort of planning every day's radio show for the next day. But I thought, well, in my off time, it'll be great. I will just crush on all of these extracurriculars that I'm trying to come up with. And then one weekend, about 3 or 4 weekends into it, I couldn't move. And I wasn't sick. I was just mentally like, all right, I may have been in denial about this for too long. And my brain's telling me to sit here and watch movies. So I'm going to do it. And then I did for the whole weekend. I couldn't move, but it really did help me. I felt like I didn't beat myself up about it, which in the past I would have. Like if we weren't under some sort of lockdown, I would have felt like, oh, well, what a jag you are. You wasted an entire weekend. But it felt different. It felt like, all right, this is a good excuse to just steer into the skid and enjoy sitting around, being a slug. And I don't even remember what I watch right now, but I watch a ton of movies.
Yeah.
And then I kind of felt like after that, like, all right, I don't think I need to do that again this weekend. But the longer this goes on, I might need to do that again. And I think the key is like, don't beat yourself up about that stuff.
Yeah,
if the inspiration is not coming, manufacturing it in a time when it's tougher to come up with that stuff. Any other time, sure, work until your inspiration comes. You have to work hard at inspiration. But right now, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. It's acclimation to the new situation is a real thing. I'm watching it in my kids. My oldest daughter's 20, and her whole college life just disintegrated. And I'm watching her hold on and sort of wait for it to come back. And I see her suffering because of it. And I pride myself on being such a good teacher, and I can't seem to help her with this one so far, to explain to her that just sitting and waiting for something to come back won't make you feel any better. Like there's got to be some sort of an acceptance as to here's what's happening now. Mm-hmm. Let's deal with that now. And then when things do change, then we'll deal with that then.
Yeah. And I think it's tough to say to people like, well, this is what's going to result of this. You're going to end up appreciating things more. I think that's really cold comfort right now. And, I wouldn't know how to guide anybody toward handling this any better than anyone else.
It's true. One good thing that will come of it, we have to learn some other ways just to be and to stay healthy through it. It seems like every year that goes by, there's another challenge that comes to us, and we have to learn to be more resilient with this stuff.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And as the world continues to get weirder, these are tools we're going to need to have in our toolbox there. Arrows in our quiver, as they say.
Arrows in the quiver. What are you listening to these days? Anything that you're leaning into? Something that you're excited about?
Ironically, I'd started off listening to a ton of John Prine, and then learned he was sick. And then when he died, I just continued my deep dive, and I've had a decades long love affair with his music. And it just seemed to fit all of this because it was coming from this place of, even when things are bad, for some reason, he makes you feel good about what's bad. Accepting your fate seems to be a big part of his music. So I'd listen to a lot of that. I thought I was going to be getting into, more of the jazz that I've always loved and listened to, but I have not Thelonious Monk is a big one for me, and I have not really gone back into the catalog of jazz tunes I want. But what I have done is gone for the stuff that has always served to be like comfort food version of music in the past. Like I haven't really been too concerned with getting turned on to anything new right now, so much as I try to think of when did I feel really good in my life. and what was the song, the soundtrack of that time. And, I put on, Van Morrison, St. Dominic's preview the other day and listened to that. And I'm like, yeah, see, this makes me feel like this just reminds me of good times. Or like Leo Kottke, My Father's Face, and I remember driving to do gigs when I was a kid and getting turned on to that stuff and thinking like, oh, this is just such, incredible music, and they're not playing it on the radio, and just, the stuff that I got turned on to that made me feel like, oh, I'm finally really discovering the world of music outside of, what's popular.
Yeah.
That was like a really good feeling when you're younger. And so I think those artists that made me realize, these were bridges to the outside world of music for me. That's the stuff that has made me feel really good. Even like the rarer Dylan albums and things like that are really good comfort. But it's interesting that it seems to me that where I would listen to Medeski, Martin and Wood and more instrumental based stuff in the past, I've not really been going for that. For some reason, the words mean something right now.
Yeah, the emotion stuff seems like it's appropriate right now. There's just so many feelings about all the different things that are happening.
Yeah, no doubt.
When you were younger, when you first started to get excited about music, like what was that for you? What was music when you were just getting into it? What part?
Well, everybody, who had siblings. It was what my brothers were listening to, what my older sister was listening to, and it was just the classic rock canon, well represented, and I got way into that at a super young age. And to the point where I had Casio keyboards, in my room. And I was learning how to play, I could play all of Moving Pictures. I could play all the Doors albums and stuff like that.
Nice.
That was the stuff that I really, really loved when I was, 9 to 14,
Oh my God, that is young.
Nonstop listening to that stuff. It was really important. And then, when I started doing shows and gigging out when I was 15 and stuff, the Docksider scene up in Erie, Pennsylvania, which you know all too well,
yep.
Which was great. I mean, I feel really fortunate to have grown up during that time. It was an amazing musical scene. But, a guy by the name of John Hyatt, not the John Hyatt, but the Erie, PA John Hyatt, singer-songwriter, gave me a cassette of songs to listen to that, like those artists I talked about being bridges to the, sort of less than popular artists of the day. It contained Little Feat, and, the Grateful Dead, and just, rare Dylan tunes and stuff that he wanted me to learn. And it was just also fascinating to me. Although these songs are amazing, and now it's the kind of stuff where of course we all know what, Willin' is, or, but I never heard Easy to Slip by Lowell George when at that age. And I'm like, who are these people? So, learning the whole sort of Grateful Dead, CSNY kind of hippie rock era was the first point of departure for me as a musician in listening to stuff. But I don't remember a time where music was not a huge part of my life. I mean, I had records that I set my alarm to wake up to, because I had one of those all-in-one stereo units that had an 8-track double cassette and the turntable.
Wow.
So you could rig the alarm to wake you up for school, and it would fire the turntable if that's how you set it up. So I would put In Through the Outdoor on, so that in the evening would wake me up. In the evening.
That's
it's
perfect.
all right, I got to get up and go to school now. But it was always, finding the excuse to, if there's a hole, you fill it with music.
Right.
And metaphoric and literal, And so I don't think I've ever stopped doing that.
That's beautiful. Do you come from a family of musicians? Are there other players in the house?
Yeah, my brother was a really great guitar player. And, but other than that, nobody else. Big appreciators of music. My uncle was a huge record collector, and had a collection that was one of the biggest in the country. When he died, it ended up going to a place in Carnegie. There was a record store down in Carnegie on Main Street for a long time, and he was friends with that guy, and he bought out his collection. But it was significant. So I grew up with mixtapes that my uncle would make me. So he'd be like, "Oh, you don't know Simon and Garfunkel?" Then he'd give me a 90-minute TDK of the best of Simon and Garfunkel. Wow. And he'd be like, "Oh, you don't know Neil Diamond?" And there would be, a full tape of Neil Diamond, the Beatles, just all that kind of stuff. He had 50s, the best of the 50s, and the best of the 60s, the best of the 70s. This was before this stuff was commonplace.
Yeah.
And now they're all playlists. But back then, it was a pretty cool thing to have, to get turned on to all of this stuff at a young age. And I knew who the Coasters were, and I knew all of Buddy Holly's catalog and the Everly Brothers and things like that at a very young age because of him. So it wasn't so much that there were a bunch of musicians around.
Yeah.
It was the music was around.
So he was like a mentor, sort of.
Like, a musical mentor,
like a musical
for
mentor,
sure.
Yeah.
He was a musical Sherpa in a way, yeah.
Very nice. Now, was he someone that encouraged you to play, or were there other people that encouraged you to play music once they saw that you were so into it?
The reason I really started playing, we had a player piano, so I would just put on the piano rolls and then kind of, mimic the keys and figure out how to play the melody and stuff like that. And it's probably why I still don't have a great left hand to this day, but a girl was organizing a church service, a mass, when I was in sixth grade, and I had a crush on her, and she was like, well, I have to find an organist. I'm like, I do that. Yeah, I totally didn't. And so I had to learn how to do the songs. And so I'm like, I knew how to kind of reproduce them by ear. And I just, did a half-assed job at it. But the priest was like, look, we're down an organist right now. Can you start doing these 9 o'clock masses? So that was really how I started playing. And then that was, to my dad, that was like having that. It wasn't 9:30 mass. It was Randy's doing a concert,
That's my son up there.
Yeah. So that was kind of how I got thrust into playing, I guess professionally, because I did eventually get a little bit of money for that. But there was not the encouragement you would think. The only piano we had in my house was the player piano, and then that broke. So then I didn't have a piano to practice on, and I had a Casio keyboard to practice on, which was very, they were very small keys.
Oh, yeah.
And so then my dad happened to find an old piano somebody's, was thrown away, and so we put it in the garage. And so I played a piano in the garage growing up with a bunch of broken keys. And in the wintertime, it was kind of not the easiest thing to do. You'd freeze if you wanted to go out and play, which I would do all the time to the chagrin of my brothers and sisters because it was loud. And then there would be like soot from the car and everything like on the key. So it was definitely not the most encouraging atmosphere. And it wasn't until I started playing, and it wasn't like they were discouraging. It was just, I was one of 6 kids. There was so much going on. Yeah. They're like, he's got a piano. That's good enough. And I didn't feel like, neglected or anything. It was just kind of funny that it was just like, here, you got this. That's good enough. And then I got a nice keyboard that was big enough without weighted keys, but I could at least practice on that when I was like 17.
So you're kind of like the Karate Kid of keyboards.
Very much.
Yeah. Just completely.
I've always said that.
So back in the 90s, you were in a really great band called Plato's Cave. I've got a very dim memory of sharing a bill with you guys, maybe at Conneaut Lake Park or Dockside.
We did. The funny thing so I remember Conneaut Lake Park, you guys played before us. And I was like, who are these guys? And it must have been like the first couple months of Rusted Root. It was not long into your tenure. And you were so friggin' good. And I'm like, these no-names just blew us off the stage. I'm like, we stink. And then we did share a few more bills through the years, but then you very graciously let us open for you guys later on in the tenure of Rusted Root at the Buffalo Auditorium, which was like 5,000 people.
Yeah.
Huge. And then the Erie Civic Center, we opened for you guys there too. So good times. And then I got to play with Jen Wirtz and her band after that too. So I've always had a lot of love for the Rusted Root family.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I we share a good friend, Dan Ostrowski, who speaks very fondly of it too. It's just interesting to see like all these different relationship circles come around, decades later. And I love that part of what this has become.
It's interesting you mentioned that because when I started kind of branching back out to playing again in Pittsburgh, because when I first came down here, I just wanted to kind of concentrate on the radio gig, and I didn't want to screw that up. And somehow, despite screwing it up, I'm still there. But so many of the faces were familiar. I mean, with Scott Forsyth, it was working, with Gray Area Productions for I don't know how many years, and up until recently with the Roxy. And I mean, he was in a band Grinch. We played with him all the time in the '90s. And Mike Sanders from Opus One was in a band Mass Gadgets way back in the day. So Denny, who's running sound now at Mr. Smalls, but then ran Club Cafe for years. He ran the cafe at Penn State, so I knew him from back there. And there were so many people in the Pittsburgh music scene that I was connected to already because of those days of playing with Cave, in the 90s. It was a lot of fun.
I don't know if you have this experience when you're performing where you have good nights and then you've got bad nights, but then there's these outlier nights where everything just goes right and everything feels effortless. Do you remember any shows like that, like those kind of outlier shows?
Yeah, I mean, those are what that's what you're going back for, right? I mean, that's what you're hoping somehow happens every time. But like when we did the last waltz at the Rex Theater, it was one of those nights. It just everything was perfect. And if there's like a common denominator on those nights where you're like, it's just killed, it's number one, the audience. Like there's always something about the crowd that you feed off of, which is why I like the smaller rooms. I like confined spaces. I like where people have to actually share space. The irony of the situation we're facing now is that we're not allowed to do the one thing that I think truly made it so special was the connectivity and the energy of everybody being actually physically that close. And I think that's why as much emotion as people's performances generate right now when they're doing these, like web performances, they're great and they're cathartic. And the thing that I feel is like, man, I really physically want to be in that church though. I miss that part of it. So for me, the thing that always kind of made those performances pop was the crowd. And it didn't necessarily sometimes have to translate into on stage was awesome. It was just that the energy from the crowd was so good that it really felt like one of those shows, We did a reunion show with Plato's Cave this past summer up in Erie, the Moondog, another name from, that is, ubiquitous. The 8 Great Tuesdays they do, that beautiful amphitheater up on the bay at Presque Isle Bay in Erie. And it was like a big reunion of that whole Docksider family in Erie, Pennsylvania. And it was just the energy from the crowd down in front that really made it a super special night. It really was super sweet. I don't, the playing aside, it was just that part of it was great. And then the thing I would say, if there's a second denominator that's common to those kinds of shows, Jim, it's hearing yourself on stage. When the mix on stage is good and you can hear everybody, when everything sounds good for some reason, it just falls into place. Because so often I think you don't want to slow down a performance by complaining about something not being perfect.
Sure.
And then you live with the shortcomings of whatever the mix is, So on those nights where everything just kind of like a Tetris piece falls into place for you, you're like, dude, don't touch it. Nobody touch anything. It sounds great. You know, I think if you could have those two things together, those are the recipe, the two factors for the equation of having, one of those magical nights you're talking about.
Absolutely. Now, do you still play at home? Like you practicing?
All the time. Yeah, every day.
When you sit down, what do you do?
So if I'm on the piano, mostly I'll do a series of different runs. Like I always kind of fall into playing like New Orleans kind of, like a John Cleary style like riff that I'll just try and nail down left hand or right hand, keep my syncopation sharp and everything, because that falls off so quickly. And if I'm on the Hammond, I'm basically just kind of doing like organ funk type stuff and just keeping the transitions and, the chordal sort of inversion, movements sharp so that I'm not, fumbling from one to another. But I wanted to keep busy. I mean, I had like 10 to 15 songs that are completed just through the year. I've always written and recorded songs. And then I've got, 25 plus unfinished ideas. So that was one of the things on the list. I'm like, I'm going to finish all these songs and I'm going to record them for me. And I think I might even had this discussion with you about like, the importance of doing stuff, not even necessarily to publish, but like the importance of creating it and just getting it done.
For sure.
So that was one thing I wanted to do. But the other thing that I'm doing is I wanted to write a rock musical based on like what I'm basing it on is the documentary Kennywood Memories, which is a Rick Seaback documentary from 1980. And I wanted to use it as an exercise to learn how to do it so that I write with through lines and thematic consistencies and callbacks and make something that feels all at once like it's all a part of the same thing, not just a bunch of different songs.
Yeah.
And then not have to worry about writing the backstory. Like, I want to base it on something. You know, it's like Pete Townsend had the story of Tommy in his head. You know, and I'm like, I don't have time for that. So I just want to base it on these characters that I've known and loved and that are kitschy sort of Pittsburgh people. And then just kind of use those stories to write, you know, the Jesus Christ superstar sounding thing of Kennywood Memories. Now, I mean, it'll probably come to nothing, but it's like a good exercise to do it, you know?
Absolutely. Just to have the idea and just to start executing it for no other reason, I think is one of the best things we can do for ourselves.
So I'm 5 songs deep in that, and I've like multi-tracked them and have like the vocals worked out and stuff like that. And I've kind of talked to Josh Verbanitz a little bit about it because like I want his approval on like how this goes down, just because it's something that I think it would be like, I don't know, if you get like a modicum of instinct about something like that, that I feel like it would be good to have as a musician.
He's so gifted. Absolutely.
Oh no, he's a genius. Yeah.
You have a theater background, don't you?
No, I don't. No, I
background.
was an accounting major at Penn State. And I was a terrible accountant, like that Dave Foley sketch in Kids in the Hall, like blood all over him. I'm a bad doctor. That was me.
I don't know where I got that idea. That's funny.
I did a play in second grade to rave reviews. I did Scrooge, and they said I should have continued on with it. But again, like the piano in the garage, there was not a lot of inspiration or encouragement in the arts. Football, soccer, baseball, basketball, sure. Yeah, but the arts were not something that you were ever thought of as a tenable lifestyle.
Now, when you're sitting down to write, or if you're in the creative mode or you're in practice mode, besides practicing your instrument for the skill, does it do anything else for you health-wise, psychologically, emotionally?
Unquestionably, right? I mean, don't you feel it in your brain? Like, actually, like, you feel good. You feel a sense of accomplishment. I mean, it must drive people crazy in families who are with musicians who don't understand the benefit of repetition, you know, because you'll play the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And it just feels good to like nail it and to keep nailing that, you know, whatever it happens to be. For you, it could be, you know, a myriad of drum patterns or whatever. And for me, a lot of times it's just like syncopated turns where I'm just doing it over and over again. And it just feels good. And particularly if it's something you've composed, not something that you're actually, you know, trying to just practice to learn. It's something that you've written, and now it's like hitting all the buttons and you're like, oh dude, this feels so good. And then, you know, it feels kind of like, I just don't want it to be like, you know, Frank Sinatra famously like always like played his records. If you went to his house, you had to listen to Frank Sinatra. You know what I mean? I'm like,
well, I mean, he was that good though.
He was that good, but like, I think it feeds a different part of it. I don't want to say ego, but it's something that reassures you that you're on the right track creatively.
Yeah.
And it encourages you to move forward, you know?
Maybe it's ego with a small e.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It feels like something that it really checks a lot of different boxes of like that, whatever sense of accomplishment you can get from doing something. When you do it musically, there's this like mathematical satisfaction that goes along with all of it that, I mean, for my brain, it just feels good. And I don't need it right now. I don't need it to go past that. I don't need it to be like, hey, sit down at dinner. Here's my latest Frank Sinatra tune. You know, it's good enough for me to just, I like doing it and knowing I can do it.
Is it that you feel more yourself when you do that kind of activity?
Well, I think for a long time it was like because I had the radio show for so long that I always considered growing up that the musical part of my personality was the bigger part. I didn't really have another part. And then when I got a radio job in Erie, that was another outlet. But even then, I never really, it was always secondary, you know? And to me, like earning bona fides from fellow musicians was always the most important thing, you know? So I feel lucky that I've got a chance to play with so many great players through the years in Pittsburgh. And before that, I feel really, really lucky to have shared the stage with so many, yourself included, you know, like that stuff is like really the thing that I think I'm most proud of in a way.
Yeah.
And it's what I'm least well known for, but maybe there's something to that. It's like when Eddie Van Halen started playing keyboards, everyone's like, dude, what are you doing? You know? And he's like, dude, I can play keyboards. And then everyone's like, no, you're the guitar player, man. Play guitar. And I feel like there was a little bit of me being like, I can do more than just this thing. And I don't know, you know, that the duality of it was always really important to me without crossing a line of being like Eddie Murphy doing Party All the Time, you know?
Please don't do that.
Right.
I mean, unless you're going to wear the pants. If you're going to wear the pants, then go ahead.
Do you know that he had a song on that album called Boogie in Your Butt? If you go listen to that album.
Now I'm going to look it up.
It's produced by Rick James, by the way. And he's got a song on there called Boogie in the Butt. And I think the refrain is something like, put the boogie in your butt, put the boogie in your butt. But like, I don't know how that was not the release. This is the first single ahead of Party All the Time. Party All the Time, very kind of, you know, that's milquetoast compared to Boogie in Your Butt. That could have been a big funk single.
That there was somebody in a room somewhere that went, no. We can't do the boogie. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but no, we got to go with this. This is a little bit safer.
Eddie, the phrase "in your butt" is where we're having a problem with this. Can it be on your butt? Can it be around your butt? Anywhere but in the butt.
Oh man! Speaking of radio, what did your start in radio look like?
I basically was a guest on a radio show up in Erie because I was playing the piano at a celebrity golf tournament up at some country club in Erie, and I got kicked out. And I was doing basically a playing for tips thing, and I was partying all day, and I was just I had been fired from my accounting job, and it was kind of funny because the mayor of Erie at the time was there, and she was asking the police to let me stay because I was doing one of those Howl at the Moon type of shows, basically impromptu. And so the cops still kind of threw me out, and I, had all this money, and I was just kind of holding it in the air, just made a scene like a jackass 22-year-old. And the host of the morning show up in Erie, who's still there, Mojo at Rocker 101, asked me to come on the show to talk about it. And it was just basically I was just playing, and whatever people requested, I would play. And it was just, all by ear, hacky stuff. And I would kind of half-ass whatever the request was. So they asked me on the air to do that, basically. And I met the owner of the station, and he was like, "Hey, you were really funny today." And I just said to him, "Hey, man, I'm unemployed right now. And if you give me $50 a week, I'll come be the third person on your morning show." Wow. And so he's like, "Okay." And so he gave me $50 a week for 2 months, or it might not even been that long, but I did think it was around 2 months. And then I ended up getting hired as the third person on the morning show. And then I did the midday. So I did 8 hours on the air every day for the first 2 years I was in radio, which was good though. It gave me a ton of chops right away. And then, when I would gig, we would play Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. And you know what that's like, I think we had at the time it was a 4-hour circle we had driven, drawn on the map. Here's where we're willing to play on a weeknight. And, you'd get into the van around 1:00, 1:30 if you were lucky. And I would just drive right to work. So it was, not the best scenario in terms of lifestyle, but it was great for getting a ton of chops in a short period of time.
So how did the DVE gig come along?
They called me. I was actually up in New Hampshire rehearsing with Peter Prince from Moon Boot Lover, and I was about to take a gig with him. He had a deal, and he was putting together a band with the former drummer of Mo and former bass player from the band Yolk, and he had this horn section from Boston, and it was just this killer outfit, and he's still one of my favorite artists. I love Peter. And he and I drove back to Boston together, and he was like, call me when you get home, man. Move up here. And I was like, I'm going back to Erie, getting my stuff, and I'm moving to Boston. And then the second I got back, I got a call, and on the caller ID, it's a WXDX. And in my head, I was like, man, they own the DVE too. And the only radio job I would have really ever taken was a DVE at the time, because that was the only radio station I had heard that I liked.
Right.
And the program director basically just said, hey, I want to talk to you about a job. And I thought it was probably for a weekend gig or something like that. But then, found out later it was for the morning show, and just interviewed for it. I never really thought I'd get a chance. I was the youngest person they'd interviewed by a considerable amount. But yeah, I got it when I was 27.
That's amazing. And for the listeners out there who are from not Pittsburgh,
right?
So WDVE, it's our big rock station in the city. It's an institution. It's been around for decades, and the morning show itself is its own institution. I remember listening to Jimmy and Steve in the morning back in the 80s, and then Scott Paulson and Jimmy Crenn, who I know you know very well. You had the show with him.
Yeah, I worked with both of them. I mean, Jimmy and I worked together for 12 years. Scott worked there for almost 3 years. After that, so I was lucky. I got to work with both of them.
Yeah, I love those guys. They're funny as heck too, and nice
no
people. Doubt. You get a chance on the station to interview tons of different people. Comedians, artists, sports guys. Can you think of maybe the worst interview you've ever had? Yeah,
Greg Allman was not good, and I was really bummed out. His book, and this was 7 or 8 years ago, his book had just come out. Not My Cross to Bear, I think is the name of it. And I'm an Allman Brothers fanatic. Oh, sure. I mean, I've dozens and dozens and dozens of shows, like 60 plus shows I've seen. And I love Greg. I could not wait to do this. I read the book cover to cover and then did an interview with him. And it was all one-word answers and non-answers. So I'd be like, so when you were first starting out, and your brother Dwayne came out and got you from LA, and you were working with Jackson Brown, then what was it like pre-Almonds or something to that effect? And he'd be like, yeah. I'd be like, okay, all right. So once you guys start at Capricorn, that first record takes off, and then, the Muscle Shoals family and blah, 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 and, having a black guy in the band and 2 drummers, and you guys kind of defied everything else that's going on in the South at the time. And he's like, yeah. And that was it. And I'm like, is he pissed? Oh, no. Or is he not paying attention? And I've come to realize that was not an uncommon mood for Greg. And he just kind of ended it. It just kind of ended the interview, I could have talked to him for 2 hours. Like, I know everything about that dude, and I would love to hear his thoughts on stuff. And I've heard him times with Sean McDowell where he's been a little more, loquacious, shall we say.
Loquacious, that's a word.
But he was not on that day, and it broke my heart. Oh. But it did start a years-long run of Scott Paulson imitating that interview, where Scott would call me as Craig, just being a terrible, hey, Randy. Hey, Greg, yeah, that one was not great, but yeah, I love the guy. Did you get to hang with J-Mo though?
Yeah.
They're like the best, right?
Yeah, super nice. I mean, everybody was nice.
Yeah, those two guys are they're just rhythmic legends though. And Mark Quinones was with the band probably too, right?
Super, super cool guy. One thing I love about you is that you really have a knack for getting people together, just gathering people and focusing them on a cause. Whether it's the Children's Hospital, whether it's that charity jam that you guys do. What compels you to do that kind of work?
When I was at Penn State, I think Dance Marathon really helped me to understand the value of fundraising in a way that I hadn't before. You know, when you're in high school and stuff, I don't think you're really mature enough to understand the potential you have to help.
Yeah.
You know? But that was the first time where I was like, wow, this is stuff that actually makes a difference. And it just kind of felt good to be a small part of a big difference. And I think the whole strength in numbers mentality is easy to make people understand. And I don't know, it just feels good to be a part of something with a lot of spirit involved in it, a lot of different energies coming together to create a common good, you know? So I've always been somebody in my family, you know, I came from a huge family, enormous. So being around tons of people has always been, you know, something that I've been very comfortable with. And, you know, I feel lucky to be surrounded by so many people who've been willing and who are uniquely gifted with the abilities to do certain things. And, you know, occasionally I've been able to say like, hey man, you check this out. You should do this. Like, you know, and maybe help someone else see that they might be able to, you know, be a part of something great. And nobody doesn't like that feeling. So it's an easy thing to do, to talk somebody into being a part of, like, you know, this thing that bears some pretty wonderful fruit at the end of it.
Yeah. Plus we're gifted with the megaphone. We can amplify the message. You can amplify your message in a number of ways. You know, one of the ways I see it is that, not that it's my job, but I feel like there is a responsibility to use that megaphone in a good way, because we're gifted with that opportunity that a lot of people would love to have but don't ever get.
You know what? And there's a lot of people, you know, who are listening who are not from Pittsburgh, who might not understand the dynamic of this town. You know, it is not a hard sell to get people to help other people in this town. It's really a hallmark of the fabric of the character of people from this part of the country. So I think it is very much inbred in everybody here. So it's not a hard sell. And it is something that I think is as common, you know, it's as much of like the social calendar for people as anything else here.
Yeah.
It seems to me around the city is something charitable. The charitable endeavors go hand in hand with everything else. And it is like a common, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, we're doing this benefit and then we're doing that. So I think it's also very unique to Pittsburgh, and it speaks volumes of the collective character of the people here.
It makes sense. We are a city of immigrants. There's people from all different parts of the world. And I can just imagine, you know, our parents, their parents, our grandparents, when they came over, like, you had to help each other or you weren't going to make it. Like, you had to lean on each other to get through, you know, those tough times.
Yeah. Well, think about it, man. Anytime anything goes wrong in your life, you know, and I don't know what it's like everywhere else, but I know growing up in Western Pennsylvania that your neighbors were there with a big casserole of rigatoni immediately.
Yep.
Your fridge was full. The second anything bad happened in your family or any struggle or strife came your way, there was a big thing of food there, because the least they could do, they figure, was feed you.
Yeah.
You know what? Don't worry about dinner. I'll take care of that for you. You know, and I remember that vividly growing up. As soon as anything bad would happen, it's like, well, we're going to have a ton of food.
It's true. When I grew up in southern Western Pennsylvania, so down in Somerset County, way in the sticks, and there was a winter where my dad wasn't working. It was the 70s, and you know, we lived in a very rural area, and some of the farmers caught wind that we weren't doing so well. And I just remember these guys pulling up in the driveway with a pickup truck, and they had processed two deer's worth of deer meat for us.
Oh, nice.
And brought it to us all packaged, and, you know, we put it in our freezer, and it fed us for the entire winter. Like, it's that spirit is it's all over the place here.
No doubt about it.
And, you know, what I love about that is that, you know, no one's asking you who you voted for. No one's asking you where you go to church. You know, they're just like, here, this is the right thing, and we're helping, and that's what we do.
Yeah, but I would say that that's definitely the biggest part of it, is that, you know, at a time when we weren't as politically divided, that wouldn't be anything that ever came up. And in a time when we are, it still doesn't seem to, when you're really in need.
It's true. it gives me a lot of hope. I do believe people are generally good.
You give me hope, Jim. You give me hope that there are good people out there who want to spread the good. You're a constant beacon of positivity.
Well, I've tried the other way and it doesn't work so well. It's true. I want to pivot to comedy. I mean, you are one of the funniest guys I know. When you were coming up, did you have any people that you looked up to who were comedians that influenced you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, my dad was very big into comedy. So he gave me George Carlin records, Bill Cosby records when I was a kid. So I knew Class Clown and to my brother Russell when I was like 11, you know.
Okay.
There's something about the older school comedy that I always love. I really love the old comics.
Yeah.
And maybe for the same reason that I was talking about the comfort of listening to music that reminds me of a good time. It's just the guys who I discovered comedy through are the guys who are always going to seem funniest to me. You know, people always say that like Saturday Night Live, you always think the funniest Saturday Night Lives were when you're ages 11 to 15. Nothing will ever be funnier than those years to you. It's just, that's when you finally start to understand that level of humor. And that's when you understand the potential of it. And so nothing is as impactful and it'll never seem as good. So I think that there's a degree of it for me that I'm a real nerd about like listening to Nichols and May records and Tom Lehrer and stuff like that. I still really love that stuff. But there are so many brilliant people now. It's like musicians. Like I feel like this generation gets so good so fast musically. Like these guys get really good, really quick. And in comedy, it's the same way. There's just something that the access has bred that enables these guys to really understand the art form and get good really fast. There's a comedian right now, Taylor Tomlinson. She filmed her special when she was 25. And it's on Netflix right now. And she was on our show last week. And I was saying to her, like, I don't know that I've seen a 25-year-old this polished at anything.
Wow. Like
she's so great at understanding the art form of what to do, how to do it. And with comedy, you know, it used to be that there was a real dead period there for a while, but the goofy stuff always gets me. I love sketch comedy as much as anything. It can be really bad sometimes, but it maybe just goes back to that whole, you know, the joy of the collective work that, you know, we were talking about that I always gravitate towards, but that's the stuff that really gets me. But stand-ups, I mean, for me, Carlin will always be number one. Pryor, I love and appreciate, but it's not the stuff I go back to that much. Bill Cosby, I have a hard time going back to now. Currently, there's so many great stand-ups. Bill Burr is doing work in the vein of what Carlin did, which is holding up a mirror in the best way and exposing both sides of, you know, what's really going on. But there's so many talented people out there right now. Roy Wood Jr., who's on The Daily Show, I think is a brilliant comedian. Billy Gardell, our own, Pittsburgh's own Billy Gardell, is a guy who has this great perspective and hilarious sort of outlook on life, who is an underrated comedian in a lot of ways. But there's so many brilliant people out there now that it's hard to... The internet has made comedy something completely different and has allowed these people to access a fan base and grow that way. In the past, it was really tough to do that. These guys through podcasts, through the internet now, can really narrow things down and really find their people so much faster so that they go from doing the comedy clubs to theaters in a jump that never used to happen. Like somebody like Brian Regan, who's a genius. It took that guy years and years to get to the theater level. And now, you know, there's guys like Tom Segura, who is brilliant and hilarious beyond belief. And he probably did it in half the time that it took Brian Regan.
It's amazing that we have exponential opportunities for input. We can look at the masters over and over and over again. We can isolate body language. We can isolate timing. You know, whether it's music or whether it's comedy, it's all available.
All comedians want to be musicians. All musicians want to be comedians. And there's a mathematical correlation between the two things. Comedy and music are both math-based. Timing, there's an equation, there's all kinds of different comedic, mathematic, unspoken and spoken rules. And in music, of course, it's, you know, it's the language. So to me, it's numbers.
Yeah, and it's also that interplay between the audience and where the audience is in that moment. And if if they're ready to be in that zone with you or not. So there's some audiences that no matter how good you play, they're just not there for it for whatever reason.
Well, they take it for granted too. I mean, maybe that's one thing this will all do, is that the hope of us starting to appreciate things we didn't appreciate before. Live music, I think, is going to be right at the top of that list.
Yeah.
And then people will stop taking that experience for granted, and the skill of the musicians too.
That would be a beautiful thing to occur.
I'm with you on that, man.
What do you got coming up? Anything new on the horizon?
No, I mean, like everybody, I'm just waiting to see how the world turns right now.
Leaning into being grateful for the things that I've got and that I'm healthy, really come to light.
You know what? Like, you're so good at that, though. When I got to sit in with you guys at South Park a couple years ago.
It was great.
And the one thing I loved about it is just how you led your band. And I love the attitude about it and the feeling and the actual joy. And there was no slog in it. And I've been in those circumstances where it's very much work for the people who are there and involved. And people are in, differing levels of good and bad moods.
Sure.
And that can affect the room. But like, you're so appreciative of everyone who's there and their talent and what they can do. And man, that kind of stuff, like, you just got to keep doing what you're doing because it's an invaluable resource that you offer, teaching people the power of being positive and understanding that it really is the way to go forward, particularly right now, man.
I appreciate that. It really is. It really is. It helps. Just the mindset itself helps me suffer less.
Yeah, but you're good. I mean, you have a genuine appreciation of stuff. And I love that you are so openly emotive about those things that you love. That really does inspire me to be more like that. I probably won't be, but it inspires me to want to be.
At least there's some want there, Randy.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of want.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, if people want to listen to you, can they do that online somehow?
iHeartRadio. Yeah, you just put in the name Randy Baumann or DVE Morning Show, and it'll pop up. And I know people are listening all over the world. So if you want a dose of what's happening in Pittsburgh, that's it. It's a little strange right now. I mean, we're all broadcasting from separate locations.
Yeah, that's got to be a weird thing, like to have the interplay of usually being able to see each other and your expressions and not having that.
Yeah, 5 people in 5 places. It doesn't make for the best situation in terms of allowing each other plenty of room to talk. There's an occasional crosstalk happening, but
sure.
It's not too bad.
And do you have any social media that people can follow?
Oh, at DVE Randy on Twitter, and then on Facebook you can just follow me. I never set up like a fan account. That seemed kind of, I don't know.
Well, you know what I'll do? If you want, I will include those links in our show notes at Donovan Health /podcast. That's where your podcast will live, and people can go check out that. And maybe if you could send me some of the links for the different charity things you do, we can include those things if you like.
Absolutely.
We'll love love people to get more into your world and just to see all the good that you're doing. Randy, and thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate getting to talk to you.
Oh, man, likewise. I love you, brother, and keep doing all this good stuff, man. Like I said, we need it now more than ever, man. You're the best.
You too, brother. Thank you so much for that, and we'll see you soon. Well, that's it for today. I appreciate you tuning in. Remember to come see us on our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search Jim Donovan Sound Health. Now, before you go, I'd like to let you know about a free resource I made for you. It's called the Sound Health Newsletter. In it, I share the latest research in music and health in an easy-to-understand form. I also share beginner-friendly music and wellness exercises that you can use every day to feel your best. When you sign up, you also get discounts and first access to all of my Sound Health products and events. Remember, it's completely free. If you'd like it, just visit donovanhealth.com and enter your name and email address, and I'll start sending you new issues right away. While you're on the website, you can also read full transcripts of this show and check out a ton of other valuable resources. If you have any feedback, send me an email to feedback@donovanhealth.com. All the information presented on this show is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Lastly, come and visit me on our Sound Health Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube channels. I'd love to see you there. The Sound Health Podcast is produced by OmniVista Health Learning and Donovan Health Solutions. For Sound Health, this is Jim Donovan. See you next time.